In this lesson, we're going to determine whether two functions are inverses of each other. We will also find the inverse function, then identify the domain and range. In other words, if you're given a function, the inverse of that function is the opposite of it, or its values, coordinates switched. So, for example, here we're given a set of ordered pairs, and let's call that set F. And by the way, this relation is a function because notice no two x values repeat themselves. Now we want to find the inverse of this function. All we have to do is simply switch or swap our ordered pair coordinates, and you will have the reverse or the inverse of that function. So take all your x's and move them to y's place, and vice versa. Take your y values and move them to x's place. When we do that, this is what it's going to look like, and let's call that new set G. So set G then is now an inverse relation, and we would say that set G is the inverse of set F, and there you have it, inverse relations. The domain and range of an inverse and an original function are interchanged. In other words, the domain of the regular function, in this case, the first example, you see the domain is the years and the range is the number. Well, if you look at the inverse of the function, and by the way, we write it as f inverse of x. So f of -1 represents the inverse of the function. Here, the year is now the range instead of the domain, and the number is now the domain. So the domain and range, simply put, they switch places or are interchanged with the function and its inverse. To illustrate that relation using a table of values, here we have, again, our years is the x values, the domain, and the number is our y values, the range. Well, when you take the inverse of that, those values swap places, and here we now see for our x values, our domain, we have our numbers, and for our y values, our range, we now have the years. So again, they sort of just swap places, your x and your y values, when you want to find the domain and range of the function versus its inverse.